Got it. I can hear him now. Welcome. I'm Barbara Dempsey. I'd like to welcome you to the first presentation of the season on architecture. This is the first of two parts of architecture. The first part being on homes in the museum area, which includes several townships in the village and Ontario Township. Tonight our speaker is Tony Leininger. Tony's a native of Edwardsburg. He's an architect. He has 30 years experience in the architectural field. Edwardsburg is home to his heart. He grew up at Eagle Lake. His family built his home, and that's where he found his love for architecture, including porches, which I think he's going to tack on to his presentation tonight because he loves porches. Tony graduated from Southwestern Michigan College after he graduated from Edwardsburg High School, and then he went to the University of Cincinnati, where he actually got a bachelor's degree in architecture. He started out as a student architect with Cole & Associates in Mishawaka, and graduated then to, I lost it, did I, for a minute? Student architect at Glazier Myers in Ohio. And from there he became a graduate architecture at Pace Design in Elkhart, and then a project architect at Borger Jones Leedy in Elkhart, a project architect and office manager at Trend Associates in Kalamazoo, vice president of operation of Elite Enterprises in Three Rivers, and a design build division manager of Zielkowski Construction in South Bend. But in 1990 he had founded the Carmine Design Group, which is now based in Niles due to needed space. He has successfully designed and managed the construction of many things throughout the Midwest, including educational facilities, healthcare facilities, religious buildings, office buildings, retail, industrial, and residential buildings. His strengths combines project management skills with conceptual design talents to develop an owner's vision. He has had several prominent clients. The Cleveland Township Fire Station and Township offices in Elkhart, many public schools, Berrien Springs, Edwardsburg, Three Rivers, Brandywine, Cassopolis, Fremont, Covart. Also the South Bend Medical Foundation, the Branch County Commission on Aging, Cassopolis Medical Clinic, Cass County Council on Aging, and the Center for Animal Health. He has received several awards, including the most recent, which was the Michiana Builders Association Excellence in Construction, for his design and build of the Cleveland Township Fire Station and Township offices in Elkhart. He's been a charitable volunteer. He's done design for the museum and also O'Hara Heritage Foundation, which is pediatric respite care for mentally fragile children. He's worked with the Barnes Fall Theater on visions for a new theater after the existing facility was destroyed by fire, and he's volunteered for the Edwardsburg Food Pantry. He's a member of the American Association of Architects, the National Council of the Architectural Boards, been a member since 1990, the American Association Institute of Architects for the Lower Southwest Michigan Area Chapter. He belongs to the Edwardsburg Chamber of Commerce and the Hope United Methodist Church. That was long-winded, I know, but he has an extensive resume, and he's really quite talented. So Tony, it's up to you.
Thank you, Barbara. I don't know who she was talking about, but wow. So if I knew you were all coming, I would have really worked on this speech tonight. But I really do appreciate you coming out tonight. This means a lot, you know. I mean, you don't get this opportunity to talk in front of people, especially, I feel like your family. I know so many people in this room. So again, thank you for coming out. So I have a little bit of a cheat sheet, and Barbara helped me because I don't have to cover any of that now. But tonight we're going to dive into residential architecture in this area. And you know, until you start researching something like this, you have no idea the plethora of architecture you have in this area. Now, I have no idea. I didn't take time looking at all the other communities to see if they have this type of cross-section of architectural styles, but we should feel very fortunate to have this much in our area. I applaud the museum for wanting to look at this and explore this type of work. It's very nice. The objective I have for this talk tonight is not for me to talk to you, but I'd like to share in this conversation. I hope as we get into looking at some of this architecture and the residential part of this, I hope that some of you own some of these homes, and I would love to hear some of the history that you might have. I'm willing to spar with you about the architecture styles, because it is all about opinions and it's very subjective. But please, if you feel comfortable, you can stop me at any moment and tell me something about these wonderful homes. I am an Eddie. I'll work around everything you said. Yes, I wanted you to be aware. I'm doing some teaching now. I'm teaching at Southwestern Michigan College. Been doing that for 12 years now. Truly one of the joys of my life. I love to talk, and if I know my subject, I just push a button and I talk. I say, wow, you're going to pay me to do this. It's a wonderful thing. So SMC, real quick, my wife will never forgive me for this, but SMC is pretty special to the two of us. We met in 1979, and after each of us had went our separate ways, had separate families and divorced, we refound each other in 2017. And so if you want to hear the rest of that story, because it's better than anything I'm going to talk about today, you might want to get with Anna. And so she's here with us tonight supporting me. Thank you. All right, why architecture? Why did I get into this? And I promise I will make my way back to that seat, but for now, I think it's important. You know, a lot of people get through college and they don't know what they're going to do for a living, but I was lucky in high school, even junior high, I knew what I wanted to do. And before I moved to Edwardsburg, I lived in River Park. Most of you know where River Park's at. And so my dad was a hobby home builder, as I coined it. And so he built quite a bit. And I remember being about 11 years old, and he says, let's go talk a little bit in the attic. I thought, am I in trouble? I don't know what's going on. And he had this idea that he wanted to turn that attic into a bedroom for me. And I thought, well, I was a little bit, it's an attic. But he kept explaining that it was going to be completely finished like the bedroom I have. And I said, I think this is kind of cool. But then it hit me. What he was really trying to do is I was giving up my bedroom for my adopted sister. And so that's kind of how it began. Then how did I find my way to Edwardsburg? My folks had a cottage for years. And in 1975 they decided that they were going to build a year-round home. And they knew by this time, they knew that I was really into the architecture thing, the design and the build. And so I never realized at the time that cutting wood would be such an inspiration for working on a project, but that was the first thing we had to do, is cut the trees down to fit the home. And my dad would say, okay, you cut wood for an hour, I'll let you work with the mason for the afternoon. Oh my gosh, it's like giving me gold nuggets. But it was a wonderful experience, and certainly something that bit me and said, okay, it's going to be architecture. All right. What else we got here? Oh, I meant to mention Mr. Runyon. How many people remember Mr. Runyon, the drafting teacher? He deserves credit too. He was creating special programs or classes for me because I was zipping through things, and I said I want architecture, and so he created a class just for me. So it was a wonderful thing. So I thank him as well. All right. So I want to talk to you a bit about just generally about architecture, and the question that people often ask is, today's architecture, is there an actual style that we can pinpoint and say that it's colonial? We all have an opinion on that, and I side on the eclectic side of the aisle of this, and I believe that it's really hard to find a new style that we can coin today. And so it's become a series and blends of many different types of architecture. And when we think about the architecture in this country, we were tracking this from the late 1600s to 1900s, so from colonial to modern. This is the time period that these homes or styles will fit into. When you're classically trained as an architect and you see things in a pure form, sometimes we go, well, why am I not seeing that pure form of architecture today? So I'd like to share with you the reasons why that changed. Think about building in a city or near a city versus the country, the rural areas. The story goes, after doing this research, we used to have architects and engineers that migrated around the cities, but there were very few, if any, in the country. So oftentimes, the classical orders that we were finding were built by builders, homeowners, and had no architect or engineer involved. And I want you to know right now, before I say another word, that's not something derogatory. I think it's a wonderful thing that happened, and it's made architecture a bit more juicy, if you will, because of all these blends of different types of work. Budget. Another reason why classical order changed was budget. People didn't have enough money to necessarily get that stone or that brick or that window to fit that architectural style. Material availability, transportation, all of these things made it difficult to adhere to a style. My favorite, though, is Romanticism. And when we talk about Romanticism in architecture, we're talking about something that works with the imagination and emotion. So think about how strong and powerful that is. And so when that happens and individuals get involved, it becomes subjective because it's not the same for everyone. So I'm kind of just leading up to what's called vernacular architecture, and that definition that I'll read to you is an architectural style that is designed based on local needs, availability of construction materials, and reflecting local traditions. How wonderful is that? Because it becomes personal, right? It's ours. No different than what happened in our area here. In 1995, an architect by the name of Amos Rappaport stated that 95% of all buildings at that time was built without the professional guidance of someone. It just blew my mind, right? Here I'm an architect. No wonder I can't find work, right? But what a wonderful thing, right? And so we have to keep this in mind of how important vernacular architecture is, the things that become ours. And so next step here is I'm going to make my way back there, and I'm going to start talking about 7 different what I call classical styles, and they're all your homes. All right. Oh, this is nice back here. Victorian. Victorian architecture, probably one of the most decorated architectural styles that we have. Uh-oh, there goes Siri. And so these slides, and I think I have one other slide that talk about Victorian Italianate, or Queen Anne. Queen Anne always gets the top billing as the most detailed, but I want to talk to you a little bit about what characteristics we see in this type of architecture. Sometimes we see arched configurations. You'll see some of that within these photographs. You'll also notice one of the most defining parts of Victorian architecture is the slender windows. And in some cases, these main floor windows would actually go from the floor to the ceiling. That was the goal, is to make them as tall as they possibly could. Many of these have what I call a bracketing or a frieze that gives decoration to many of the Victorian homes. Decorative window trim, see if I can find something like that, where a lot of detail around that window. And I want you to pay close attention to this as we migrate through these other styles later on, how we keep losing little bits of pieces of this architecture. It can be sad, but we've evolved, right? Polygonal towers. So you might not see this structure all that Victorian, but I pulled it in there to show you when vernacular happens and you can't necessarily build to the classical order. These are the things that happen, and they're not bad. Steeply pitched roofs, Gothic arch, if everyone knows. Back to my other photo. Gothic arch usually has that point on it. Okay, so it goes up and creates that point. Polygonal bay windows, another earmark of Victorian work. And group chimneys. I can't remember where that photo was at, but one of these, there it is, up in the right-hand corner, where they group the chimneys together. One thing that we don't see here that I was taught in architectural school is Victorian, oftentimes when it wasn't brick and it wasn't stone and it was wood, there would be almost always 5 colors. 5 colors that would make up the palette for that building. I wish I had a photo of one to show you tonight, but think about color, and sometimes we do this at home, right? We pick colors, and for inside, it becomes harder outside, but think about how to blend all those colors. Which is the most dominant, what's the least dominant, and all that. So very difficult to do, but that was known to be a part of the Victorian world. Don't forget the rules. If you have anything to say about any of these homes, any of the history, yes, please.
The top right ones, these are the homeowners of that building.
We've been there over 30 years.
30 years.
It has a very rich history to it. I could probably write a book. But it's a labor of love, and I would never want to live anywhere else. It's got a very unique personality, and don't think I'm weird, but it is what it is.
What's your favorite part of that house? Is there some function of that house?
The front parlor.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. This is what's going to make this successful. Yes.
Is that on Davis Road?
Yes.
I painted the whole inside of that middle picture, and Tom painted the whole outside, so I'm very familiar with that. That's what I was trying to say.
I'll never forget the tour you gave me that home. Never forget. Anything else in this Victorian category? All right, we're going to move to. We all have favorites. Didn't I say that about being subjective and it's not the same for everyone and all that? This is. I'm just going to say it. This is my least favorite architectural style. I really don't know why. It's just never been a favorite. But Tudor revival, we start seeing things that oftentimes the top of chimneys, we started introducing that clay cap. Casement windows started to come on the scene. That was never, I don't think it ever came before this. Timber stucco treatment. If there's one thing that defines the Tudor revival is that combination, and you can't miss it, right? And I don't think I have a good one. Might be here. Talking about a Tudor arch at the front door, where instead of it being Gothic to a point, it kind of gets slightly flattened. So all these little characteristics that make up an individual style. Any comments about this one? So we'll go from the least favorite to my favorite.
Okay.
So the bungalow craftsman style is close to my heart, and I get goosebumps because my wife and I own a bungalow craftsman style home, a historic home in Dowagiac. And yeah, it's some pieces of this kind of go back to the prairie and Wrightian style, and you can see little similarities. But and I'm a big Frank Lloyd Wright fan. But the characteristics here, and I can't remember if I have 2 photos here. Yeah. So let's look at something that would be classical. I mean, this is The bungalow, that's about as classic as you're going to get for a bungalow. It has the dormer treatment in the front that's very defining. Many times, if you look for bungalows, you will see this crazy long span. And I have a personal story about those long spans. When we first moved into our home, I jumped rope at the time on the porch and kept watching that beam, and I swore it was still moving. And sure enough, we had builders out and we tore into it, and it had totally decayed. So just in time. So what else do I want to talk about here with this? A pronounced horizontal roof treatment, widely overhanged hips, heavy window trim and brackets. Oftentimes you can see these brackets here. This home is special to me. When I was a kid, this was the short home, and that ended up being my boss at Pace Design when I came out of college. It was Terry Short. Strong gable dormer we talked about in this one. Tapered columns. One of my favorite characteristics of this style is those low tapered columns. But nothing compares to the eyebrow scupper that lets water off of that porch. Andy and I find ourselves looking for those, trying to find them. There's not many around. Yeah, anything to add here? Some wonderful homes. All right. Spanish colonial. I think this might be the only photograph I have of this category. Another one of these architectural styles that you can't miss, right? It's kind of like that Tudor style where there's some characteristics of it you just can't miss. What they are, you often see that classically framed door, tower, balcony configuration. That's very common with the Spanish colonial. Lower sloped roofs. Why could they get away with lower sloped roofs? Well, they ended up putting tile on their roofs, and so if we know anything about shingles, we have to have certain pitch to shingles, or we can't even get a warranty these days. But that snow tends to slide off, and a much more conducive roof system for our weather. Oddly enough, you won't find many of these here. You find them in the Southwest or different parts of the world. Stucco wall surface is the other characteristics here that it's that monolithic look. There's no siding lines. There's no joints. It's just kind of this mass. This is another one of my favorites, and I know it's Annie's too because of all the rocks and stones. One of the most interesting styles I think I'll talk about will be this, the shingle style. Some call it Romanesque. When it gets dark and heavy like this, even though this is more of a modern home, we sometimes call it Romanesque. But interesting thing about shingle design is that how it came to be was people were saying that they were trying to design for suburban resorts. So I don't know if you can see it, but there's times when I look at these designs on these slides, and I do start to see kind of that resort feel, that you might see. Other things that are the characteristic of this style is showing off the roof. One true way to always find a shingle roof design is to, if it's showing it off, just like it is here with all that slate roof, which is beautiful, right? Oftentimes we shy away from doing that, but in this particular style, it's all about the roof. Some rounded contours, you'll see a few of those, not terribly, but one of the other key characteristics is extreme surface differences. So you almost go from flat here to a very rugged, even the slate, all of them kind of working in harmony to create this surfaces of texture. Last but not least, that when it does become Romanesque, it becomes dark and heavy and protected. Any comments here?
We have the owner here.
Please say something.
Jones, Grand
grandfather built that.
Which one was it?
The stone home.
Oh, the stone home.
Yeah, Jones' blood relation to that, and her grandfather built it. He gathered the stones, driving back and forth to the art shop in South Bend.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
So,
Where's that located? Which one?
North Shore.
Bottom left.
Bottom left?
The both, the three there.
Number 3.
That kind of goes back to, I don't think it's working. Check. 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 Kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about the difficulty of transportation and getting product, to these build sites.
And the small home there was, they lived in it while they built the big one. And it took longer than they expected. And they had 4 kids in there. And then one of his daughters had their family in there. 4 kids together.
Oh,
So,
well, thank you for sharing. That's wonderful. All right, well, I'm sorry about this not working. Let's see if I can check. Check.
There you go.
Another very defined style, right? You can't miss this one. The A-frame, which some people confuse with shingle, right? Because we're showing off the roof again. But notice this shingle doesn't have that texture, and so typically we just characterize this as the modern A-frame. Other things that we look for here, that shingle S that I just talked about, steeply pitched roof, and usually we have a dominant center. Oftentimes you'll see that center structural line might be displayed. It moves out on a different plane. It's not flat. And then of course, if you're gonna go to the trouble of creating this A-frame, right, you're always going to have a fair amount of glass. So you're usually a vista of some type. Yeah, there's some good texture there too. So yeah, you could kind of swing it back over to the shingle style too. Any comments for this home? What street is this on?
Bonnie, what street is that on?
We were just talking about that back here, trying to figure out, Maureen took that one.
Okay.
Is that Barbara Lake?
No,
Is that on
Almost
Merle?
by that intersection, right?
How about Merle?
How about Merle?
Think
Okay.
it's Merle.
Okay.
Looks like that. Remember that?
This is what's making this fun. You guys are interjecting. Okay. I don't know if you're paying attention to these styles, but they are slowly becoming less detailed and more geometric. And so the modern geometric shed design, as we call it, we will see monoslopes. So any of these would be considered monoslopes, just one direction. We get away from the gables, we get away from the hips. Upper clerestory windows became pretty popular with this style of design. One of my favorite things that we practice every day in our office is what I call area delineation. So instead of having, see this right here, we might call that a wainscot. It goes up so high, a wainscot of that stone treatment. That would be an area delineation where that entire area is a different material than this area. And so as we get more modern with design and we show off geometry, we find ourselves more and more talking about this area delineation piece. Lake life usually finds its way attached to these type of homes where you can see that you start creating exterior spaces that are nice for lake life. Emphasis on the visibility to the vista, and I think you might start to see why we call this part of an international design movement. Some of these things look like they come from Europe and different parts of the world. Any comments here? All right, so now it's time to change gears. That was kind of like part one, if you will. Part two is a different definition of vernacular. Now, this is when we can start sparring because I created this. As I was putting this talk together, so I have no idea if it's real or not, but I'm sharing it tonight because it's an opinion. The other thing that changed architecture away from classical order had to do with an event or a social condition that changed, like a world war or the Depression. And so when we start talking about the other definition, I really see this as we move through these next styles, that how we became extremely frugal, right? Some of you certainly can relate to living through some of these times. And so I think that, I'm just putting it out there, I think there's another part of vernacular architecture that makes us think about we become very modest and we do less because of things we have experienced in our life. So, what do those look like? Well, it doesn't get any more minimalist than this, and we kind of call the American small house. That one on the upper left was extremely popular in the 40s and 50s. On the right-hand upper right, it's kind of like a small version of a ranch. But I do think that this is probably the epitome of the comment that I just made, that we saw this come about potentially because of these post-war and poor economic conditions.
Sears garages. Sears sold garages
Yeah.
after World War II.
The kits?
They take 2 garages and make a house.
Interesting. Any comments here before I move on? I had to throw this in. I think we only had one log cabin, but the reason I want to talk about log cabins is us Americans, we like to take credit for everything. We like to say that we created everything, and this is the furthest from the truth. The Scandinavian influence is how we captured the chinking and that whole construction style. Notice that, again, not a terrible amount of detail, and most of the details in the construction itself, right? All right. Modern colonial, and we call this a revival because if we go back to one of the earliest classical styles of architecture in this country, it was called colonial. So we try to give it a revival or some modern touch to it. But you know, things that we're looking for here that is a standout is we often 2-story stacked the design, okay, and I think that clearly calls out there. Front door head treatment was always a big deal, and you can see some of that treatment in some of these. Double hung windows became extremely popular in this particular architectural style. Porch columns, okay, so that shows up in a couple of these, and so happy to, I can't wait to talk about porches. Fan transoms. There's a fan transom here somewhere. Like, that's a window, so maybe it's not on this one. I got one. And there could be mistakes. So, bookend fireplaces. Things that we tend to see with this particular style. Any comments on this style? No, let's go back. Yeah, so you're talking about the decoration here. So you know, it's a pediment. You know, it's kind of a door pediment with lots of nice detail. But let's go back to that. So remember what I said, that we minimalist was big because of those events. But we slowly grew out of it, right? And then we talk about, the next style we're going to talk about is estate, modern Georgian, and Romanesque. So I always think it's interesting when you go into a community and you find what we call the mansion, old historic homes. Those have different product, different materials on it than anybody else in town because they could afford to transport it to that location. But the modern day version of this becomes something like this, where hard not to call it estate-like. It's heavy. We often see this as permanent materials. You don't normally see in a home like this where it's all sided with wood siding or some type of synthetic material. Stone coining. Oftentimes we see stone coining on the corners, but here, interestingly enough, they have done it as a treatment around the windows, which is that combination of the brick and the stone. Okay. I love the polarity here because they're very modest, and then we go to these estate homes. But a lot was going on in this particular period. The modern ranch started to blossom a bit, and you can see maybe the smallest on the upper left. They just keep becoming elongated as that lower left. And then we started to get tricky with it and started to get into the split level. But if you're not aware, one of the reasons why that came on the scene is everyone was still trying to look for the most cost-effective way to do things. So if we built more of it into the earth and it didn't have exterior materials, I was saving a little money. So an interesting style. I had to show the one on the lower right because it makes me think it's from a different country. Okay? It has an international feel to it, irregular windows. The treatment just is a little wonky. I love it, but it's not the normal modern ranch or split level.
Got a question?
All right.
Yes?
I always associated those flat roofs with the name modular,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's where they built the house in a factory and
Yes.
brought it out and put it together on your site.
I couldn't agree more.
And the slope was much less than on other.
Yeah, the modular industry got themselves in trouble after a while because they kept bringing that slope down and the shingles wouldn't hold up. But yeah, exactly. That's true to form. That was the modular design.
Tony,
Yes.
when we were doing these, one of the things we learned was that during this period of time, there were lots of studies done on the family and the family's activities. And so that's why you have a split level because of that study of the homemaker maybe only wanting to clean part of her house.
At a time.
At a time, right. And then the separation of sleeping and fun. So you can see the change then with the family.
Interesting. We should have known house cleaning would find its way in there. All right. Anything else here? Okay. Another style that is part of that second movement in my mind is this pyramidal design where the roofs became much more hip and interesting. But it actually has this name. It's a pyramidal roof design or a pyramidal roof house. And I don't have anything else to say. I mean, it's really, again, let's remember where we started in this talk tonight and all the detail, the rich detail. Nothing wrong with this. But we did this for reasons. There were reasons that we became this simple.
Good.
Happened because of the war and the difficulty of getting
Yeah,
product.
absolutely. I mean, I still believe it was a direct correlation. I really do. iHouse. I think it's important that you learn something. So working with Bonnie and trying to figure out how to organize this talk tonight, you know, she was sharing with me some of these Indiana, Illinois regional type architectural styles, and this iHouse came about as just it's the shape of a home. Okay, it's simple. Oftentimes, even though the one on the upper left is more one story, oftentimes they became a two-story. Now we can argue that that's nothing more than colonial revival that looks just like the other ones. But I wanted to be able to point out that this came about because the I stands for Indiana, Illinois. That's where it actually came from. And I thought it was for the shape. How we arrive at this is quite interesting. Practical, cost-effective, stacked.
Those were on a lot of farms too. It's a typical farmhouse.
Exactly. Another thing that I learned with this regional architecture, that gabled L houses, we see these all over the place, and not just here, but anytime you have that change of roof ridge or gable, when it changes and becomes an L of some configuration, that there's an actual gabled L house. And then probably to put right along with it is a gabled T-plan house. And now, if you're paying attention, some of these were Victorian. I had them in the Victorian slides, but I think this is proving my point that do we have a one architectural style as we become more modern? No, we have something that's very eclectic and a blend of many different types of architecture. Okay, so anything else to add here? Notice the porch, because that's where I'm going next. You ever get a chance, you haven't read this book by Philip Gully called Porch Talk. I didn't ever pay attention to porches, really, being completely honest, until we bought our house, and it had this magnificent porch, and we loved to sit on it. And I just think that as we talk a little bit about this, I think this will hit a nerve, because I think it's affected our community, if you will. I think what happened, and especially in the 50s and 60s, we turned our back on the main road, our community, and we said, okay, I'm going to have a backyard, I'm going to have my back patio, I'm going to have my back deck, I want my private space, I don't want to be part of the community. And so I think that, I'd like to think that porches represent community, right? And
Represent what?
community, right? And that we find this as a place to communicate and talk to one another and solve problems. This book talks about it's a place of entertainment. Friday night was game board night, and people would play games on Friday night. Every Friday night would be when the weather allowed, right? I think that it's also a place to see and a place to be seen. And that leads me to a story that when we moved into our house in Dowagiac, Annie and I are kind of social beings and talk to everybody. And so there we were sitting on our porch, and people are walking by, and we'd say hi, and they'd cower. I mean, it was like no one had talked to them. And so I think in time, people are finally getting used to the Leiningers. We're talking to everybody as they go by. But I do think that we're missing something. It taught us manners. Porches taught us manners. You walk by and somebody's on their porch, and who's invited up automatically? Who'd automatically be invited up would be family members and close friends. But if a passerby stops and has a discussion, they wait patiently for the invitation. And if the invitation does not occur, they move on. So there's something really eloquent about that, about things that we've lost, and being kind and respectful. So last thing I'll say about porches is, have you ever wondered what the true decline of society is? There's many. The book talks about broken homes, poverty, disease, television. The book says, I think it's just a shortage of front porches and the conversations we had on them. All right, I'm gonna conclude here with just, I'd like to open it up for more questions, but I hope that I've given you a different light on architecture in general, especially on vernacular architecture. I hope you appreciate that this blend of architecture is not a bad thing, and having classical order is not everything, but I want to thank you for having me this evening. Thanks.
Tony has a mic, so if anybody has any questions, direct them to Tony.
When I met Marge and went down to her hometown in Batesville, there were a lot of homes that were called T-shaped houses. I don't know where they fit into this, but in the country they built a lot of those.
Yeah, the L's and the T's, they were a big deal, and those were different ridge lines, right? Different gables running different directions. Yeah.
A lot of the farmhouses down there are T-shaped.
Makes sense, yeah. Those always were a classic farm home.
And another thing, you talked about log cabins, and you talked about being in this house where you could see the shuttering of the wall because the beam was rotting.
Mm-hmm.
That happened in log cabins, I gather, too.
I would think.
Well, we were adding onto our house at Eagle Lake, and we brought a beam from a barn in Batesville on top of our station wagon, all the way back here.
Should have had a video.
And they put it in there. It's 15 to 18 feet long, I think, and of course, barn beams are 10 by 10. And will they have to worry about that rotting away?
You know, I would have never dreamed that something that was built in 1900, that I would see that type of decay. I just, the builder, who was an Amish company, and I said, how did this not collapse? And they said, because of the rest of the house that it's contingent adjacent to is so strong, we don't build like this anymore. So the only saving grace for us when that was happening was everything else was built so strong that it was keeping it up. It's amazing.
I want to take a chance to introduce Bonnie Elder and Maureen Barnowski. The talk by Tony actually came about because Bonnie and Maureen had a vision. And that was that they wanted to go out and photograph all of these different architectural styles in the community and set up the exhibit. So they did this with all the pictures you see here and the display. They put them up, and we're going to have buildings after we have homes. So in the second half of the season, I think starts August 22nd, the building architecture will go up. But anybody have any more questions for, Don has a question for Tony.
I don't have a question, I have a comment. I don't know how many people was around when Tony was in high school. But he was a great drummer. I didn't know why he didn't.
He still is.
Still is.
But nobody said anything about drumming, all he got is houses.
It's not in his resume. Drumming isn't in his resume, so I didn't know that.
I also heard studies have shown that drummers are the most intelligent members of the band.
I like that, Tom.
That gets another $5.
We're gonna have a social hour now, and Eleanor Woodall brought the cookies and the lemonade, so they're in the other room, so if you guys all wanna talk to Tony, why, have at it.
In the best way. Thank you.
Thank you.